Deathworld might seem a appropriate description of what's transpired the last few weeks, and hopefully you can access the audio. Because of what happened, it ultimately delayed the next Lost Story release, being Deathworld, which was in fact one of the most hyped releases. The original and unmade idea of the multi-doctor story battling Death, who is a figure and entity who has had involvement in the series, but more so the extended media and the wilderness years. Which does bring up this question: would Deathworld be a better addition than the Three Doctors if the idea of Deathworld went through? So we have to put the audio to the side here, because the charm when it comes to Big Finish is obviously visuals don't play a part in the budget. But the original idea of the Three Doctors was beyond crazy. It would have revealed the Time Lords were main players in a battle with the Federation of Evil, which led to a stalemate between the two Titans. Almost as the Federation of Evil was the equivalent of the feud between the Daleks and the Time Lords. To counter this evil, the Time Lords would have no choice but to bring the might of the Three Doctors together to defeat this insidious threat, and would end up battling not just Death herself and the Federation's empire, but vampires, demons, centaurs, and many other mythological creatures. It sounded like the Time Monster on steroids, with a mix of the Mind Robber, which a reference to the Time Monster does make sense, as it is Bob Baker and Dave Martin. But it seems like some of the ideas of Deathworld may have been pushed into the Time Monster in terms of mythological creatures. But I am glad it didn't happen, because my word, it sounds like it would be a nightmare in terms of budget and production. Therefore, I feel leaving the story purely to the imagination would end up being the best direction for Deathworld. It does seem there might have been a plan, or at least an idea, to make the Federation of Evil the next best thing in Doctor Who, like how the Daleks impacted the 60s, and then the Cybermen in the Patrick Troughton era. But I doubt it would have achieved those results. The Federation of Evil gives off more of a vibe of the Wilderness Years Virgin New Adventure style villain, but it hasn't stopped theorists from believing the Federation of Evil are perhaps the entity and the individuals behind everything in Doctor Who's canon. Kind of like how the 8th Doctor books sort of played on the same idea in the 90s. One major difference is the First Doctor's involvement playing a more active role compared to the story we got on television. The Three Doctors did have weird production scheduling. It was publicised before contracts were signed. This proved problematic, especially for Hartnell, who had to perform his role in a single day and reading lines from cue cards because of his illness. So the Three Doctors changed wildly, but still keeping the idea of using a powerful figure, not Death but Omega instead, who despite being well known in the fandom and referenced in every single rumour video when a new series is announced, for some reason doesn't really hold a big mark on television, despite him having quite a big title as a villain. I mean, besides the Three Doctors, it's, well, this. I don't know what this is supposed to be, but I would rather not acknowledge it. That being said, let's take a look at Big Finish's adaptation of Deathworld. Despite the Three Doctors replacing the idea of Deathworld, the setup of the story, especially the scenes depicting chess and how it controls the universe, and a figure who describes himself as the personification of Death, not that he just identifies as Death, but he is in fact Death, very much gives you the feeling of the Five Doctors. The kings on the chessboard, being the three kings, very much represent each incarnation of the Doctor. In terms of setting the story's events, Deathworld features sometime after defeating the Master for the Third Doctor. You could say it would run parallel to the Three Doctors. For the Second Doctor is sometime before the Web of Fear, as he does not know who the Brigadier is. And for the First Doctor, it is after the Savages. The scenes of the Brigadier seeing a catastrophe around him and the chaos ensuing with explosions and gunfire, and his own loyal men turning into zombies, the lab destroyed where the Third Doctor and Joe Grant were last seen. The setup is pretty awesome. The the Doctor seems to disappear when a king is defeated by Death. Then the second Doctor is gone. Therefore, the last one to be taken, or the final king, is the first Doctor. So Death is very much has the pride and ego of Omega, especially with his one-liners, saying the Brigadier and his troops are insignificant, so he's like Omega besides the anger issues. To my surprise, what I was very happy about this story is the involvement of the Brigadier in the story and how the first Doctor gets incorporated into the story. Adding both them together is just like perfect. It could not be better. Just seeing the stubbornness of the first Doctor and the militaristic mind of the Brigadier and them clashing with the banter is just freaking perfect. The second and third Doctor obviously had the banter in the Three Doctors, while the Brigadier and the first Doctor, they especially have the banter here, which is something I never expect to witness, but damn I love it. And it had to do a very funny little joke to the Daleks' master plan. You know what I'm on about when I mention the name Brett Vian. But yeah, I would start with the biggest positive I have with the audio. It's the performances, clearly. Everybody here enjoyed recording this one immensely, so I tip my hat to everybody here. Like I said, with the Brigadier's role, I wasn't really expecting the role he had within the audio, but I 100% love it. John Coleshaw, splendid job. I like that the first Doctor played a stronger role, which it does bridge the gap for the next first Doctor release, which I very much appreciate. Yeah, part 1 was excellent. Yes, it did act like a whole big setup for the Doctors to enter Deathworld, being Death's reality and his dimension. And I love the fact that they're in limbo, trapped, and most of the time they're just bantering and arguing with each other. And they just, sometimes it's almost like they forget that Death is right in front of them. But now Death holds the cards to their lives, so Deathworld acts as like a sort of a waiting room for Death to decide what happens next. Now the Doctors are left to comply to the game. The third Doctor and Jo seem to be in a war. The second Doctor and Jamie are in a forest surrounded by people suffering with famine. And the first Doctor and the Brigadier are in a hospital building surrounded by patients who are ill, suffering from a plague. Now all these little events seem to have a connection with each other, but I'll get to that. The longer it goes on, the more familiar and similar it feels to the Five Doctors, just in different places, a little bit more diversified, which in the Five Doctors it was just a dead zone which just acted as quite of a, well, dull wasteland. Death and his role is interesting, appearing as different characters in these various settings. Death portrayed in media isn't something which is just the personification of evil, but portrayed differently in various pieces of mythology and history. Ancient Greece viewed Death as a good young man with wings. The Romans depicting Death as Moors, appearing feminine. Celtic, with Death covered in black robes, and the Baltic, describing Death as an ugly old lady with a poisonous tongue, then adopted the Celtics' depiction of Death. It does incorporate that idea of Death being various characters and his different appearances in the story. Death convinces the third Doctor and Jo they are enemy spies. The second Doctor and Jamie are fighting against famine, who have now resorted to cannibalism and are looking to feast upon the second Doctor and Jamie, and a plague affecting people in a hospital with pestilence. So the story, or Deathworld, this dimension created by Death, has themes related to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, or the end of the world, covered in chapter 6 with the Book of Revelation. The white horse representing conquest, infighting. As Death says, war is hell, referencing the red horse, which is war and bloodshed. The black horse being famine, which the second Doctor and Jamie see. And the pale horse being sickness, who are ill and sick, fighting off a apparent plague. And the horse as well, representing death. You also got the 7 deadly sins, was a brilliant but weird inclusion into the story. Lust was lusting too damn hard, and gluttony was eating and drinking down at the microphone. It was disgusting, but I guess that was the entire point. Gluttony is disgusting. I think the part that goes against the story is it can kind of be a little chaotic. It throws so much at you, and I think it limits these ideas being developed to their full potential. I like the idea of featuring stuff like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and the 7 deadly sins in Death's reality and dimension. Maybe I wanted a little bit more out of it. But did this reach expectations, as this was a very hyped release? Yeah, I would say so. It did hit the mark for me. I think media outlets rating it a 10 out of 10 is overrating the audio, but I cannot deny the performances here were flipping outstanding, top tier. I did say the story is kind of chaotic, and I stand by that, especially towards the end. I wouldn't say it's a dense listen. It's a very easy and a fun listen. I would just say it throws a lot at you. Just crazy ideas. Maybe deserved a little bit more development. But yeah, that's really the only thing I have against it. I would describe putting the Mind Robber, the Time Monster, and the 5 Doctors into a story, and you somehow create a Deathworld. I give it a 8.5 out of 10.